Thank you very much. I want to start by two thank yous. The first one is to the organizers for asking me to talk here in an area that is really close to my heart. And the second thank you is to you for turning up so early. This is absolutely fantastic. So I'm going to talk about the small sensor big discoveries. And this is my disclosure slide, and moving on from there. Does size matter? Is bigger always better? And actually you can think about it that, of course, nobody wants a small pizza. Right? We all want a big pizza. However, things change when you have to carry things, because you don't want to carry this, you'd rather carry that. Right? So it's all relative of what you're doing and where that size comes in. Now, when it comes to CGM, it really evolved, as we heard earlier, it's evolved over the years, and particularly in the past 10 to 15 years, it's been incredible. So we had a very good CGM device before, and that then evolved gradually to smaller devices with smaller sensors. And actually now when I show the latest sensor to my patients, they get, oh my God, this is fantastic, this is so small, and remember, so easy to carry. Now, when it comes to the Freestyle Libre 3 Plus, the advantages are that it's a 15-day sensor. Please note the mod, and this is how you assess accuracy. Not a long time ago, we were happy with a mod of 15%, and now we dropped it below that magic number of 10%, and it's down to 8%. It's an expanded age range. You can use it in 2 years and above. And of course, it also allows for its integrated experience with pump systems, so you can have the closed loop with this particular device. Now, let me take you through the journey of the type 2 diabetes. So in terms of type 1 diabetes, now we're using CGM in all. I think we all accept that. But type 2 is more a heterogeneous population. You've got different people. And let's face it, it can be difficult to put every single type 2 diabetes patient on a sensor, because it costs a lot, there's a lot of education to do, a lot of data to analyze. So let me just walk you through this. So when it comes to MDI-treated type 2 diabetes patients, these are largely similar to the type 1. I don't see any difference personally. I've been saying this for years, that actually the type 2 and MDI is exactly the same as the type 1. And we do have the evidence to show that if you use CGM in these guys, and there are evidence with Libre, you reduce the hypoglycemic exposure and you reduce HbA1c as well. Also, and do not underestimate this, you get an improvement in patient-related outcomes. And they are really important because you can engage the patient better. If they are feeling better in themselves, they engage in their treatment. And as you know, with a chronic condition, you need that patient engagement. Now, one thing you've got to be really careful about is a recent publication that I absolutely love. It's something I wanted to do, but my colleagues beat me to it, and good for them. What this study shows, say they took type 2 diabetes, MDI-treated type 2 diabetes patients, and then they randomized them into 3 groups. One was a control group, it's the blue line, had SMBG, so capillary glucose testing. The black line is the CGM, and the red line is the CGM with education. And as you can see, you get the most benefit if you combine it with education. And it's something I'm very keen on myself. When it comes to education, remember, it's education, healthcare professional, but also the patients as well. And it's a completely broad area that we can discuss it for a long time. But education is really important to get the maximum benefit from the CGM. What about, so this is the MDR-treated patients. What about basal insulin? If you look at basal insulin with a Freestyle Libre, there was a really nice observational study showing you that if you use it in people on basal insulin, you get a reduction in HbA1c by around 1% or over 10 millimole per mole. But what was very interesting to me that no matter how you analyze the data, A1C below 9, above 9, age, gender, insulin, BMI, whatever, how long they've been on insulin, whatever, you do get a benefit. Of course, the maximum benefit you get in people who've got very high HbA1c, but even ones who've got A1c below 9, you still get a benefit. Well, it's not only that, but that translates into hard clinical outcomes as well. You get a reduced admission with DKA, and you get reduced admission with severe hypoglycemia. So you get this benefit when it comes to hard clinical outcomes. And talking of hard clinical outcomes, because, you know, we always focus on short-term glycemic studies, but do we know what happens long-term with the use of CGM? And this is a study that was conducted by our colleagues in France, really very nice, big numbers. On the left, you have the type 1. On the right, you have the type 2. The dark blue column is the 1 year before Freestyle Libre. And then you've got the blue column is 1 year after. And this light color, greenish color, is 2 years after. So you can see in the type 1 diabetes patients, you get a reduction in DKA, hypoglycemia, and in total, you get a reduction in all sorts of these complications. And that is actually mirrored in the type 2 diabetes patients. So you get a reduction in year 1, and that's sustained, and that's really important, right? So it's not that you get a reduction and then it goes away. That difference is sustained over 2 years. So we covered MDI-treated patients, we covered basal insulin, we covered sort of the clinical outcomes in guys who are in different treatments. But what about those who are not on insulin? And there are a number of smaller studies. This is one of the bigger ones and really very good study, looking at what happens if you give the sensor to somebody who is not on insulin. And you can see what treatment they were on, metformin in almost all of them, and then sulfonylurea in half, GLP-1 receptor agonist in a third. So it's a proper representative type 2 diabetes population. And you can see here that if you combine the sensor with education, you do get a reduction in hyperglycemic exposure and an increase in time in range. So if you look at the time in range, it increases by more than 10%. Time above range is reduced pretty significantly as well. And what's very important from my point of view is that this does not occur at the expense of increasing hypoglycemia. If anything, numerically, you get a less hypoglycemic exposure as well. So reducing the high sugar levels safely, which is really important. And you know, when it comes to type 2 diabetes patients, we generally rely on their HbA1c, don't we, to see whether their control is good. But HbA1c can be misleading. And this is a case, you've got Keith, who's a 66-year-old gentleman with type 2 diabetes. He's feeling tired and thirsty, right? So alarm bells. He's waking up repeatedly each night to empty his bladder. Again, it's suggestive of osmotic symptoms. He's on metformin, glycoside, sitagliptin. His A1C is 52, 6.9. So you look at it and you think, well, actually, this is not too bad at all for somebody in their age group, and perhaps we don't need to do anything. But look at his CGM. If you look at the CGM, he's got a time in range of 22%. And this is not a 2-week, this is a 90 days CGM. So it is reflective of the A1C. And the reason for that, this person had elevated bilirubin and had significant hemolytic anemia, which makes HbA1c unreliable. Now, of course, you may say that, oh, you're taking an extreme case. That's true, this is an extreme case, but we have loads of other cases where you have differences of 10 millimole per mole in A1c, which is clinically significant, but we don't pick it up unless we are doing CGM. We have a session on Friday morning, if you're interested in this kind of thing, to discuss it. So I encourage you to attend if you can. So what about, we are using now the GLP-1 receptor agonists more and more. What about CGM use in these patients? So if you look at these guys, so there are 2 studies that I would like to cover. One where Freestyle Libre was added when patients were already on a GLP-1 receptor agonist. And apologies, there's a slight mistake here. It's not within 880 days, it's after 180 days of starting the GLP-1 receptor agonist therapy. And you can see that you get a very impressive reduction in HbA1c once the sensor starts. In another study, the sensor was added with the GLP-1 receptor agonist. These are, by the way, observational studies, I must say, versus matched group with GLP-1 receptor without a sensor. And what you get in both groups, you get a reduction in A1C, but if you have the sensor with the GLP-1 receptor agonist, you get an additional 0.4% reduction in HbA1c, or around 4 millimole per mole. So to conclude, in these studies show that if you add a sensor to GLP-1 receptor agonist treated patients, you get an additional benefit, a glucose benefit, that is. So I mentioned earlier that it's difficult to get the sensor to every single type 2 diabetes patient. So what shall we do? And I was lucky enough to work with a group. It was absolutely fantastic, a group of experts where we tried to have a consensus of what to do. And I'll walk you through it, and this could be a good discussion point. As you heard from our chair earlier, we would like to hear disagreements and discussions later on. So what we proposed here, that in all individuals with type 2 diabetes, it would be useful to have a sensor at the diagnosis, because then you establish a baseline, right? And the other thing you can do is you can evaluate a response to treatment. So if you're starting them on treatment, you can tell, is this treatment working or not? In people with stable diabetes, here in the middle, it would be helpful to have a sensor to uncover hidden glycemic abnormalities. I see loads of patients with hypoglycemia, older patients who did not know about it. They did not know they are having hypos, because we know that in an older population, the hypo symptoms can be masked. Also, it helps to adjust therapies in these guys. For instance, if you're changing therapy and you're relying on A1C, you'll be waiting a long time to escalate that therapy. Whereas if you have CGM, you can escalate the therapy very quickly. What about long diabetes duration? The same thing. Uncover dysglycemia, escalate therapies as necessary, because we are all guilty to some extent, not escalating therapies, glycemic therapies that is, in people with diabetes. But also de-escalate therapies. Can be very helpful, the sensor, to de-escalate therapies as well. And then we went on to say who should have continuous access to CGM and who should have intermittent access. So for the continuous access, we said people who are insulin treated, because we've got data on the MDI therapy, on basal insulin, these guys probably would benefit from continuous access to CGM. What about intermittent access to CGM? Non-insulin treated patients. Why? To reinforce the education, and people can tell what lifestyle changes are doing to their sugar levels, and monitor adherence to treatment and how change in therapy is having an effect. Now, we can, of course, discuss what intermittent means, because it can mean a lot of things, but we can discuss that later. And finally, I just wanted to touch upon these special groups of people where we don't have enough evidence, but where CGM might be very helpful. Pre-surgical patients, for instance, we know that hyperglycemia post-surgery or before surgery is associated with poor outcome. Maybe that group of people would benefit from having CGM to get their sugar under control before surgery. Psychiatric disease, we have done a small study, and actually it was very interesting that people with advanced psychiatric conditions wanted to know their sugar levels. People with physical or mental health disabilities, take people with Parkinson's disease, rheumatoid arthritis, those guys can't check the sugar that easily. What about cancer? Remember, a lot of cancer therapies can cause diabetes, and I'm not talking only about steroid in cancer. Hospitalized patients, as well as people in the older age group. So all these guys may benefit from the CGM, although we don't have enough studies there yet. There are a lot of studies ongoing in cancer now. One of them is ours that should be starting very soon. So I would like to finish by saying that HbA1c serves us well, but we should use additional glycemic markers to optimize management in type 2. We need to have practical guidance for CGM in type 2 diabetes that can differ from region to region according to local resources and financial burden. An accurate and reliable CGM is important, but technology on its own is not enough. Please remember the combination with education. This is how you get the maximum benefit. Thank you very much for your attention.